Chances are, at some point in your life, you've watched videos or read books related to self-improvement, or in other words, self-development, self-help, personal development. You get the idea. I personally enjoy this type of content as it has helped me get to where I am today. However, one of the challenges with providing advice in videos such as these is that I can't speak for everybody. There are always exceptions, contexts, and different levels to the advice that I give or the advice that anyone gives. I'm not always right all the time. I'm still learning, and my opinions may change over time. That's why I encourage those who are actively consuming self-development content to give yourself breathing room to try new things. Things that your favorite motivational speaker or guru would not recommend. To see where those ideas go. There is never a guaranteed to work blueprint for success or a right way to live. It all depends on the individual and where that person is in their life. I might say something, or you might read some advice in a book, but that doesn't mean it will be helpful for you specifically. In these videos, I instead try to focus more on encouraging the importance of self-love and the power of expressing yourself fully, openly, and honestly. I believe self-development fits into that category. Therefore, I find it to be a positive thing in general. However, there are exceptions. There's a difference between positive self-development and toxic self-development. The story I am going to be talking about today portrays toxic self-development and what happens when one is pushed harder than they can handle. The Great Snail Race is one of those classic SpongeBob episodes. Most people watching this have seen this episode already, so I won't spend too much time talking about the plot, but to give a brief synopsis, SpongeBob is kind of a jerk in this one.
Let's go, Gary! Start moving! You're blowing everything we trained for! Blowing it!
Okay, he's really a jerk. He enters Gary in the race to prove that his snail is quote-unquote better than Squidward's. Of course, in order to prepare for the competition, Gary needs a coach. So SpongeBob takes the responsibility of that role. Little does he know, Gary doesn't care about this competition. He would rather watch his favorite show than participate, but SpongeBob does not allow him to have any fun. Which is respectable in the sense that if you want to be successful at something, you have to sacrifice the short-term pleasures and the distractions in order to stay focused on the task at hand. However, the inability to properly balance free time and self-development can lead to burnouts. Though, I don't want people to use the fear of burnout as an excuse not to push themselves. Don't underestimate yourself, but also don't push yourself too hard, or allow others to push yourself too hard. Positive self-development is found through motivation. There needs to be a reason, a why, to improve in a particular area. Otherwise, you are living someone else's life and not your own. In this case, Gary is forced to live SpongeBob's dream. The problem with SpongeBob in this episode is he only cares about his image, how he will look once Gary wins the race. It becomes less about Gary and more about bragging rights.
Get out there and win so we can rub Squidward's big fat nose in it.
Self-development is positive when one is not practicing it for validation purposes, and instead to feel better or more loving about themselves. Competition is also positive in the sense that it motivates us to express our greatest abilities. The problem is when it becomes less about the game and more about not being good enough in general. In this episode, SpongeBob forgets that at the end of the day, it's literally just a game.
Not good enough, Gary! Not good enough! Faster!
This leads me to the following question. At what point is one good enough? After all the videos, all the self-help books, and after listening to all the motivational speakers, when are you finally complete? When does the journey to becoming better finally end, and you finally get to have fun with your life? From my experience, the answer is it goes on forever. There will always be a pet peeve, something that person does not like about themselves, something that needs to be changed. And in my opinion, that's when self-development becomes toxic, when it becomes less about self-love and more about self-hatred, when life is put on hold, joy is lost, and all that remains is emptiness and neediness for something else. One can drink all the protein shakes, do all the workouts, and take as many cold showers as they want, but at some point, they have to accept themselves for who they are, as they are, in the present moment. At some point, they have to start living life to the fullest. If self-development is enjoyable to that person, then great, but if it constantly leads to more suffering, then it's best to stop. Since SpongeBob doesn't know when to stop, by the time they get to the race, Gary's already gassed. In the middle of the race itself, Gary burns out both physically and mentally. Patrick, on the other hand, is patient with his pet rock and doesn't stress it out, which would be impossible anyway. But for the sake of this video, let's pretend that the rock has a mind of its own.
It's okay, Rocky. You go when you feel like it.
The rock feels comfortable going at its own pace, which is why it wins. This is similar to how I personally function. I'm someone who likes to work slower than the average person. What's helped me become successful over time is going at my own pace, but still being open to new ideas or advice from other people. The belief that you have to put in 120-hour work weeks like Elon Musk, or you have to sacrifice your teens, your 20s, and finally live once you're 30 is ridiculous. In conclusion, be careful who you're getting advice from. There is a lot of clickbait on the internet that can give you the impression that there's something wrong with you, something you need to change about yourself right now, something you're not doing right. But chances are, you're doing just fine. You probably don't need to watch the majority of these types of videos. You might even be happier by not doing so. This video is a reminder that life is meant to be enjoyable. However that enjoyment comes depends on the individual, but don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough as you are. Thanks for watching.